Welcome back to this episode of the County Seat. If you're watching this, you obviously have joined us for our continued web conversation of our broadcast from Sunday. And again, I'd like to introduce our guests. We have Jeff Gravitt, and he's from Salt Lake County Emergency Services. Mike Stever, who is from the Utah Department of Health. He's the emergency manager. And Wade Matthews, who is the public information officer for Tooele County's emergency management. And gentlemen, thank you for staying a little bit with us. And let's get back into talking about specifically things that we need to do. I mean, how do you get ready, and where does that dialogue go, and what sorts of things, just let's flesh out the details.
In my presentations and education efforts in Tooele County, I talk about our family disaster plan having 3 different areas or elements, and that's gathering things, knowing things, and doing things. One of the most important things we need to know are the protective actions. How to get out of danger's way in the first place, how to keep ourselves safe, our loved ones safe, as that disaster is beginning to occur. And those protective actions include evacuation. A prime example of what can happen if you don't follow those instructions, again, is Hurricane Katrina, when many people chose to stay in New Orleans and suffered greatly because of it. There's also sheltering in place, and then finally drop, cover, and hold on during earthquakes. I think it's important to know and to practice these protective actions to keep ourselves safe in a disaster.
Does the website that Jeff mentioned, is there information about that there?
Oh, it's loaded with preparedness information. It gives any reader the opportunity to take a look at all kinds of things that you could put in a 72-hour kit. Mm-hmm. And the great thing about it is you can do something about it today. You can put a plan together, and you can buy water today, and next week you can get a radio, and the following week you can buy protein bars, and then you can take a look at what medication you might need or you ought to have. What special needs do you have if you have small children or elderly or somebody with some functional need kind of problem? And before you know it, if you're doing something, and I like the way Wade put that, do something, mm-hmm. You're moving forward, and before you know it, you've got essential needs that you can grab and go when the time comes. And I think that that's one of the biggest challenges that we have in any given community is kind of this idea, it's not going to happen to me, so I'm not going to worry about it. So we're lacking in our efforts to get something done.
They, on that BeReadyUtah.gov website, mm-hmm. even have emergency pointers, tips mm-hmm. for your pets. A lot of our families have pets that are family members, and they don't want to leave without the pooch or the cat or even the birds. And so all of that is taken into consideration. There's really no stone left unturned. It's all there, taking ownership and then dealing with it as a family. And like Wade said, you might even want to have an earthquake drill or a practice fire drill in your home. We never really know how things are going to work till we practice.
Well, let me add to pets. Mm-hmm. Last couple of years, during our flooding events, our wildfire events, the Chevron oil spill, one of the biggest challenges we had in our coordination efforts was that of large animals and family pets. And as we were working with evacuation and developing reception centers and potential shelters, there was a lot of work that had to be done to deal with horses and cattle and dogs and cats and rabbits and chickens and all of those kinds of things.
And you're talking Salt Lake County.
That's right. Yeah.
And that's something we as a county could call to the state for help with as well. The state agriculture department has great plans in place, as Jeff is talking about, and we've practiced with them. We hold exercises, disaster drills, and we've practiced with their animal rescue teams and those types of things in response to a big disaster. So they have a great resource there.
Yeah, they actually have mobile kennels that can come out and stage right next to the shelter and help deal with family pets and those kinds of needs. People won't leave if they can't take their pets with them.
It's part of their family.
Yeah, absolutely.
Worst case scenario, if somebody wanted to be really well prepared, worst case scenario, how much of an emergency plan should they have? I mean, you're saying possibly a week, but if it were majorly catastrophic, you know, how long could it, I mean, realistically, what do you think the outside window is before you could actually get any kind of...
That's a really difficult question to answer because the variables are endless. If it's a catastrophic earthquake or a fire or something like that, the cavalry will arrive in a few days. If it was something like a global pandemic, a disease outbreak, help may never come because the very nature of a pandemic is it's coast to coast around the globe. And it probably will move faster in the current world than it ever has in times past. So if Mother Nature sends us a pandemic disaster 3 or 4 times per century, there's no reason to believe it's not going to happen anymore. So the 72 hours is the planning figure. The week is more accurate. If you can do a month or a year, you'll be sitting pretty.
Disasters kind of occur in phases where the original phase is onset when the emergency occurs. Then there's a response phase when we're rolling our resources and trying to get help where help is needed. And then there's a recovery phase. And that's when we're trying to get things back to normal as much as possible. Restoring infrastructure, power, utilities, road repair and cleanup, that type of thing. And recovery can last a long, long time. As Mike said, years. I mean, they're still recovering from Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. Recovery can be a long time.
What's your tolerance of risk? Are you willing to take the chance that your children may go without food and water? Are you willing to bet on we'll have stuff here in 72 hours? I choose not to do that.
Boy,
I choose not to take that risk.
That's the most sobering thing that's been said so far at this panel, Jeff. That's a very good point. You know, how much risk do you want to take? Because that really does throw back the element of ownership of this thing.
Yeah, at a neighborhood preparedness group that we were talking to once, somebody mentioned that they can find a knockoff Swiss Army knife for $1, and then they have a knife in their kit. And the other side of that coin is, we may never need that kit, but if you do, and your life depends on it, do you want to depend on a knockoff knife that you bought for $1, or do you want to spend $5 or $6
There you go.
and get a good quality knife? Because if our back's to the wall and we depend on it, nothing else will do. So it's just good insurance.
And I heard this phrase somewhere, I'm not sure where, but and I use it in a lot of my emergency preparedness presentations and education. In a disaster, you don't rise to the occasion, you sink to your level of preparedness.
Ooh.
So how low do you want to sink? How low do you want to suffer? You know, again, I use Hurricane Katrina a lot. There were so many lessons learned that came out of that great national disaster, Hurricane Katrina. They were living like animals. And how low do you want to sink? It's up to you to be prepared, so you are able to stay afloat.
You know, as we discuss this, I'm sure leaders are listening. And if you're a leader, then you have a responsibility to lead by example. Because we're going to ask a lot of our leadership element, all the way from a police officer, a police sergeant, on the way up to the commissioners, to step up and provide the leadership that they're sworn to do. So they also need to be prepared.
That's true. I also believe it needs to work the other way, and you need to go the other direction to, you know, local clergy, you know, LDS people, and organizations, and of course that group's pretty well prepared anyway, but I think it needs to go the other way, right down to, you know, who's the most active neighbor on your block, the guy that, I mean, you can tell of your personality of your 5 neighbors, one of them is going to be the ringleader. And,
Sure.
And if they're listening, do they need to be taking that ownership and responsibility to lead by example? Does it have to go that far?
Absolutely. A disaster is going to require the efforts of everyone. And you mentioned clergy. I mean, church organizations are going to be called to for help, and membership is going to go to them for direction and assistance. Volunteer organizations, non-governmental agencies, everybody is going to be involved. Businesses, business continuity. Ready Your Business is another great state program. Everybody's going to be involved, and everybody has some things they can do to get prepared for that major disaster. Everybody's going to be involved.
Okay. Any other topics that you want to cover? I think we should go over the websites again. of where people can get more information on this and let them continue.
I think there's two key ones. There's the ready.gov. That's a national website that FEMA sponsors. And then the local website, which our friends at the state have done just an absolute bang-up job on, is bereadyutah.gov. And everything you need, every piece of information you need to be prepared is on bereadyutah.gov. Fantastic website.
Well, that's good. As we wrap this up, I would encourage everybody to make their way to that website, because the coming disasters are not going to be elective. They are going to be widespread, and when they show up, you're not going to have time to look up those websites and get that plan in place. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. It's been an excellent conversation.
Thanks for having us.
And we'll look for you next week on the county seat. Thank you all for being here.